I am Muhammad Al Faisal and I'll be discussing about the section 2 of Embedded Lab 4, which is system design. So for this part, we were given some skeleton projects which we could use to understand how this system design works. So for the section 2, we have to design a crosshair which moves along a axis, and for that we use the sample example of the die example. So when we use the die example, we actually realize that how the graphical coding works. So at the beginning, we have drawn the axis, and then we have drawn the red crosshair, you can see, and this was done by some codes, which is the draw axis code and the draw crosshair code. And here in a fraction of line you can see LCD draw line. This was taken from the Nokia LCD, which was a command for our drawing of the line. Then after drawing this, we started to tinker with this program so that we can move the crosshair along the axis. And to move that, we have used move crosshair and clear crosshair functions. And these two functions are just simply we do the moving by redrawing the crosshair in another position and also drawing another crosshair in the same position with the background color so that it disappears from the screen. And when we can move this one, now the next part was to integrate with the accelerometer, which is attached to this microcontroller itself. And it was done by another module example which was given to us. It was the accelerometer example, and we just opened that accelerometer example. Then through this code we just received few samples in the Kitty software. We have entered these sampling's extreme values in our code so that we can calibrate the resolution of the screen to those values. You can see the code which was used to do this, and these values MMA, these codes were the code used from the accelerometer part. Now let's see how this accelerometer values helps us to move this crosshair along the screen. So now you can see that the crosshair, when the microcontroller is kept flat, the crosshair is almost at the center. When I tilt it 45 degree, it's almost at the middle, and when I tilt it fully 90 degrees, it's almost at the end. So our hypothesis, what we thought, it works because our tilting should give the values of the accelerometer to the system, and the accelerometer values changes the position of the crosshair accordingly. So when we go right, you can see it's also going to the right, and accordingly to the other direction also it moves.
So I'm Mohammed Babakar, and I'll be taking off from where Faisal has left, specifically in section 2. As we can see here, the lab sheet asked us to restrict the movement of the crosshair in the LCD screen. So for us to be able to do that, we had to configure the values of the accelerometer, whereas we have set the maximum that the crosshair can move is 125 and the minimum is 5. And the reason we took away 5 pixels from both points, since the crosshair itself is 5 times 5, basically means that if we don't assign it to be 125, then the crosshair will exceed the screen, and we do not want that to happen basically. So as we can see here, the crosshair will just be touching the edges of the screen as a maximum, and then it will freeze in that point until we move it or tilt the accelerometer value basically. Moving on to the last point in section 2. So we have so here, as we can see, the system is reset using this button, and then we can see that the crosshair is perfectly positioned in the middle of the screen. And we use the while statement here to assure that no code is executed unless the center switch is pressed. And as we can see here, upon pressing the center switch, the grid is displayed and then the code is executed, in which you can see it's functioning.
And I will be doing section 3 for our embedded lab.
To have the tone feedback working, and we are not allowed to use delay loops as per the lab requirements. We are going to use the PIT, which is the programmable interrupt timer, which takes two values, and here we see the basic commands that will initialize our PIT, such as enabling the clock, the module, setting the reload value, enable the channel interrupts, etc., and setting the priority level. So for us to do that, we need to do some calculations in order for us to get the value for the interval. For us to do that, we first of all calculate the time it takes for one tick for our 48 megahertz, and it is to be 20.8 nanoseconds. So we chose a refresh rate of 0.1. So for that to happen, we need approximately 5 million ticks. Main function, we key in these values that we want in the initialize PIT command, where we set our channel to be 0 and our interval is 5 million ticks. So the use of the PIT serves us as it is that it has more advantages than using the main, like the usual delay loops, whereas we are more power efficient, whereas the cycles are not wasted, since the PIT only runs upon call.
Next up is tone generation, and it uses an FTM channel which sets an interrupt which makes 3 different tones with varying frequencies. The FTM is first initialized and the interrupt will be set up later on. So in the initialization you can see that first the clocks are enabled for port D and FTM 0. Then the port D pin 7 is enabled and the PCR mux 4 is set. This is because the FTM 0 channel 7 exists on that mux 4. Later on we set the common registers, we set the clock as 0, the initial count is set as 0, the count is set as 0, and the mod which sets the maximum limit, the value for it is 65,535. The Chi mask is the channel interrupt enable. So this basically enables the channel for output compare. The MSA mask and else A mask is vital to this. The else A mask should be 1 and the MSA mask should also be 1 in order to toggle the pin. So that's why we use MSA and else A mask here. And then the command later on is used to schedule the first flag event. So what basically we do is we add 100 to our current count value and then we set it up for the flag trigger event. Lastly, we enable interrupt signal in the NVIC. The interrupt is set up so that whenever the overflow occurs, a flag is turned on. And when it is turned on, it must be turned off so that the next event can be triggered later on. The duration of the event will also be set here. This is done using this wave variable. The wave variable is what sets the number of ticks, and depending on increasing or decreasing, it will change the frequency accordingly. Lastly, when everything is set up, we use this command here to enable the clock and set the prescale as 5 according to our calculations, so that the port can send in signals for the buzzer to sound. The frequencies we are using are 500, 1000 and 1500 Hertz. The increasing frequency allows us to make differently pitched sound, where 500 Hertz will generate the lowest pitch and 1500 will generate the highest one. So the calculations here are basically using the prescale value we got, we just get the tick period, and using that tick period we get the number of ticks that we will need for each of the specific frequencies. So the values that we got for the ticks was 500, 750 and 1500 ticks. Lastly, we combine all the modules given to us into one system. So when I enable it, it should work according to the requirements. So with the sound you can hear, the tone is being generated. And since it's at the middle, the tone right now is of the lowest frequency. Later on, when I move it along lower, when I change the angle at 45 degrees, it generates a higher pitch sound, and when I make it 90 degrees, it generates an even more higher pitch sound. So we are satisfying that requirement of our lab. Thank you.